Hello and welcome to the Meet the Parents podcast.
Hi, it's Tim here. I know you're not supposed to start a broadcast with an apology, but I'm going to anyway. Sorry. The sound quality on this week's podcast isn't up to our usual mediocre standard. In particular, I sound as if I'm talking underwater for the entire recording. Don't worry, I didn't drown. Bear with us this week, and next week we'll be back to our usual standard of being only moderately appalling. Anyhow, on with the show. Hello and welcome to episode 72 of the Meet the Parents podcast and another week of parenting chat. I'm Tim from Slouching Towards Thatcham, and tonight I'm joined by Hannah from Budding Smiles. Good evening, Hannah.
Hello, how are you?
I'm alright, thanks. So we're back from half term, and on this week's agenda we're going to talk about the sacrifices we make as parents and what dads have to do to establish an even footing with mums in the parents blogging world. Now, when we become parents, I think we all know that our lives will change beyond all recognition and that we will inevitably have to make sacrifices for our children. We often hear about the world-class sports people who acknowledge the sacrifices their parents made for them. The swimmers whose parents would wake up at 5 o'clock every day to drive the kids 50 miles for training. The gymnasts who get transported all over the country or Europe to take part in national and international competitions. Other parents give up work and pour all their savings into treatments for children with physical conditions or defects or special educational needs. But even as part of the 99.9% of parents who would class themselves as ordinary, we all make sacrifices in our own way as well. So let's spend a few minutes just recognising and discussing those everyday sacrifices that so many of us make. Now, Hannah, There are the obvious sacrifices that parents of newborns and young children make, aren't there? Sleep is perhaps the most obvious one, as you're all too familiar with.
Yes, indeed.
But then there's the pain experienced by many mums who breastfeed, waving goodbye to the expensive holidays and the nights out. But what are some of the biggest sacrifices that you and Phil have made since becoming parents, and what things do you miss the most?
Initially, I thought, in a rather jovial sense, I might say my sanity. But then when I thought about it, actually, postnatal depression wasn't something that I was prepared for. Nobody really, tells you about those sorts of things before you become a parent. So that was a big thing for me. So I'm not saying I completely sacrificed my sanity, but there was certainly massive elements of me just being Hannah that I'd expected that I wasn't really going to socialise much, and I knew my travelling would take a bit of a knock, although that's one that I'm very keen to get back into as soon as possible. But I think it was the sacrifice of self that was actually the biggest shock to me, because I didn't realise, I'd always kind of thought I want to be a mum. I didn't really have any career goals in my sort of teens and 20s, because I just thought, I'm just going to be a stay-at-home mum and I'm going to be happy with that. And then I became that, and it wasn't what I expected, because I lost so much of my own identity. So I ended up actually needing a career and needing a lot more in the way of a friendship circle and my blog that I didn't realise I was going to need. So certainly identity, if that's not too big of to say that I sacrificed my identity. But I think it's something that very few parents are probably prepared for when they enter this parenthood malarkey.
Postnatal depression is something really that's only been acknowledged in, I guess, the last 10, 20, 30 years or so. It was very much a taboo subject before. And I guess even more recently than that, postnatal depression that can affect fathers as well is something that is much newer as well, and still very, very rarely talked about.
Absolutely. I mean, when I was pregnant with Martha, so I hadn't actually experienced the full-blown postnatal depression that I was to have once Martha was born. But I think it was either just before I fell pregnant or during my pregnancy. I was doing a series on my blog, which was about the emotional well-being of parents. And some dads guest posted for me talking about their experiences with postnatal depression and anxiety. And the amount of comments I got about how dads can't have postnatal depression, I thought, are you kidding me? I just couldn't believe that in this day and age, people were still thinking that because you're a dad and you didn't physically carry or give birth to the baby, that you can't struggle with the same anxieties and the same stresses and concerns and all those things that can build up and very easily turn into depression. I really wasn't expecting that reaction.
It almost seems obvious when you think about it, doesn't it? Because the birth of a child, particularly a first child, but it can happen with subsequent children as well, is something that affects both halves of a relationship. There are certain aspects that a mother takes more of the brunt of, but it's such an upheaval in a couple's life that it's not surprising that it does affect dads as well as mums.
Exactly, and I think I don't know if I'm assuming you probably were the same, but with Phil, he was putting so much effort into supporting me that in a way, a lot of his needs and emotionally, and everyone asks how the mum is doing. There's not much consideration about how the dad's doing, and the dad is often really sleep deprived and bending over backwards to do everything possible to try and support the mum, because maybe she's breastfeeding, or even if she's not, she's recovering from this major trauma of giving birth, because no matter how good, I had fantastic birth experiences, it's still a major trauma, there's still a big recovery. And so a lot of Phil's focus both times was on helping me, and therefore his needs were just sort of secondary to mine, really, and I don't think people take that into consideration.
No, I think that's definitely the case. And you mentioned travel as well, and I think for us, lack of travel was certainly one of the big sacrifices for us for a long time. Our three kids were born at pretty much 2-year intervals, so for 6 years we always had at least one child who wasn't toilet trained, and for a similar length of time I was forever impaling myself on stair gates. The day I finally removed them for good was one of those little punch the air moments that only a parent of children of a certain age will truly understand. But I'm digressing. Before the kids, we did travel a lot. We'd go off on holiday at least 2 or 3 times a year. Everything from city breaks in Europe to 3-week road trips around the likes of California and New Zealand. We visited relatives in Malaysia, Australia and Canada. We stood on the rim of the Grand Canyon, on the top of the Great Wall of China. And for a while after the kids were born, we didn't go anywhere more exotic than Butlins. I do miss our holidays, and even though we started doing some bigger, more ambitious holidays the last couple of summers, it's not quite the same when it's 5 of you sleeping in a hotel family room or staying in a Eurocamp village, drinking wine in hotel bathrooms while the kids sleep. Not that I'm complaining. We're lucky. We're lucky that we can afford to go away on decent holidays every year, and that the kids are good travellers as well. And while we suffered some years of hardship and heartbreak before the kids were born, it took us 5 years and 3 miscarriages before we had either kids. It did give us the time to get some extra years of travelling in before we started our family. So some sacrifices, yes, but no complaints, I guess. Are there any sacrifices that you and Philip had to make that were unexpected or much bigger than you expected?
I think some of the unexpected things have actually been the little things, just the ability to sit and watch an entire movie without falling asleep, and that's when we started at 8 o'clock in the evening. The fact that we don't go to the cinema, we don't go to many gigs. We have started to now, and I think that's part and parcel of having 2 children very close together with pregnancy and breastfeeding. Just simply getting out of the door child free was a massive thing that we didn't manage to achieve very often. I think the biggest thing has felt like our time as a couple. We just don't get much time anymore, because by the time the kids are both in bed and chores have been done and blogs have been written and whatever else, we're just knackered. And, you end up sort of grunting across the sofa to one another before just plodding off to bed, and then it's lather, rinse and repeat for the next day. So I think we really truly value any time that we do get just the two of us, going down to London together or going to see some live music, because those things are very few and far between.
And I'm sure the experiences and sentiments that you've just expressed will ring a bell with an awful lot of parents. And for me, it's much the same. I think the lack of social life is an obvious one. We moved house with starting a family in mind, and as it worked out, Heather fell pregnant with Isaac the week before we moved.
Oh, wow.
And moving meant, moving away from a lot of our friends at the time to a part of the country where we didn't really know anyone. And that sacrifice, at least, was quite quickly resolved because we made a lot of friends through things like NCT and antenatal classes, and then nursery and later school. But once the kids were born, we didn't have much of an immediate support network in terms of family and friends around us who could just take the kids for an hour or an evening while we went to the gym. Not that either of us have been to the gym at all since the kids were born. Even going out for dinner, that kind of thing. Even now, we go out together comparatively rarely. I mean, just this year, I reckon we've been out for a meal together 3, maybe 4 times. And beyond that, it's, as you say, it's little things, isn't it? With kids who are older now but still get up ridiculously early, or in Cara's case, who still spend part of the night sleeping in our bed, I think I'm still constantly knackered. Maybe not quite as bad as when they were newborns, but I'm still constantly tired. I used to read 30 to 40 books a year. Now I'm lucky if I read 3 or 4. We rarely go to bed at the same time now, and that's a habit we got into after years of Heather being in bed by 9:30, 10 o'clock every night, while I would stay up doing my own thing. I used to play a lot of PlayStation games. That quickly fell by the wayside as the PlayStation became a backup DVD player, or alternatively, a tempting slot for toddlers to post coins into. I have no idea how the PlayStation is still working. And films as well, as you said. As far as going to the cinema is concerned, if you exclude films with animated characters in, the only film I've seen at the cinema since the kids were born are the 3 most recent Bond films. In fact, I'm actually looking forward far too much to the prospect of flying long haul for the first time in years early next year and watching some films on the tiny 7-inch screen on a plane.
That's saying something.
Let's finish with a slightly tougher question. Are there any sacrifices that you deliberately haven't made, where you've drawn a line in the sand and said, no, I'm not doing that? Or are there any sacrifices that you wouldn't make in the future?
That's a really interesting one, because as I alluded to at the beginning, I always wanted to be a stay-at-home mum. I was raised by a mum who worked as a childminder so that she could stay at home with us, and that's what I really wanted to strive for. And then when I was finding it just too difficult, the postnatal depression, just everything, it just didn't suit me. I didn't suit it. I don't know. I love my children endlessly, but it wasn't for me. And it was just before Martha turned 1 that Phil and I sat down, and I was just saying, this isn't working. And so our sort of drawing the line and saying no was actually, to me, destroying myself in order to try and be the sort of mum I thought I was going to be. And instead, ever since I embraced the fact that actually I thrive a lot more when I'm working, and I've gone and got myself a full-time job, which is on a fantastic career trajectory, something that I never thought I would be able to achieve until the kids were much older. Drawing that line and saying, I'm not the mum I thought I was going to be, I'm this sort of mum, and I'm this sort of career person, has been hugely beneficial for all of us, I think.
Sometimes they're decisions that you're not expecting to make, and that you end up making because life has gone in a slightly different direction to how you expect it. And they are tough sacrifices to make, to say, actually, I'm not going to do this, even though maybe you've been preparing yourself for it for all that time in the lead up to it. And I guess I'm quite similar. I think we've tried to take a balanced approach financially, but we haven't allowed it to prevent us from enjoying life, even if we didn't go out much. My parents were much less well off than we are now, and they made really big financial sacrifices to put my brother and I through school and university. And while we've made some provisions for the kids' future too, we know that we're not going to be putting them into expensive public schools or anything like that. So so we haven't tried on that front. When it comes to spending a bit more on family holidays or cars or other creature comforts, that hasn't stopped us. I haven't been willing to sacrifice family life for a bigger, better job as well. I think, as I've mentioned a few times previously, I deliberately took myself out of consideration for more senior jobs that required significant amounts of travel for several years because I didn't want that. I wanted to be actively involved with the kids, and I don't regret making any sacrifices in my career. And Heather's actually sacrificed even more career-wise. She wasn't in as senior a role as I was, but working in the IT industry as she does, even taking a year's maternity leave, which she did 3 times, is actually quite a big sacrifice career-wise because things move on so quickly. And
Yeah.
since she went back, she's been working part-time between 3 and 4 days a week, ever since we had the kids. So her career, at least in its current form, has pretty much plateaued, which is fine. We went into parenthood with our eyes open to what was likely to happen, and she's largely been okay with that choice. She hasn't been willing to sacrifice time with the kids for the sake of working 45, 50-hour weeks for a bit more money and a better job. I guess you sacrifice one thing so you don't have to sacrifice another.
Yeah, definitely. It's like you said, it's balance, isn't it? And I think that's the main thing. Whatever that balance means for each individual family, that's what you sort of strive for.
And going back to something you said, I think the only other thing really that maybe we've sacrificed too much of is I think we focused at times so much on the kids that maybe we sacrificed a bit too much in terms of our relationship as a couple. But I guess those are the choices you make, and something has to give. I mean, the last 10 years haven't been all plain sailing by any stretch of the imagination. And while maybe we would have done some things a bit differently, I think we're both kind of comfortable with where we are, and we're okay with the sacrifices we've made, even if it does mean that I've now had to sit through Frozen and Moana at least 100 times each. Yeah, there were worse sacrifices that we could have made. Is no one interested in what dads have to say about parenting? It's something that's been on my mind as the blogging conference and awards season has drawn to a close over the past few weeks. Now, we've touched on bits of this before, but dads are a very small presence in the parent blogging world. According to the TOTS 100 database, less than 10% of parent bloggers are male, although I suspect that number is starting to rise. And at conferences, that percentage is even lower. At Blog on Christmas last month, around 20 out of 200 attendees were male. That's an unprecedented 10%. And more often, it's more like 2 or 3 or 4%. So at BML, the week after, there were only 7 or 8 men out of an estimated 250 attendees. So here's a question. What needs to come first? Should major blogging events cater more for men, or is it up to men to show up first and demonstrate that there's demand for dads to be catered for? Chicken or egg?
I think it is a bit of a chicken egg, but from what I've seen in blog conferences, certainly Blogfest last year, and to an extent 2015. I really enjoyed 2015 overall, but certainly last year, it was so catered to mums that there was this massive element of man bashing. And so the few men that were there, yourself included, were essentially just the butt of jokes and just really quite awful comments in a lot of respects with speakers and the various panels up on the stage. And so I think that there are already dads attending these conferences, but they're not being catered for. And so if the very few that do attend then feel like they're either the butt of jokes or not being catered for in whatever way, of course, then the next conference, fewer men are going to go, and it then has that domino effect. So I actually think it's up to the conference organisers to ensure that if they're doing a parenting blogging conference, that all parents are catered for and not just the female contingent, and hopefully that would trickle through and show a lot of dad bloggers, because there are plenty out there and plenty of good ones, that they're just as welcome at these things as the mums. There's always going to be more mums there just because there are such a vast amount more mum bloggers, but I think that if the conferences were doing more to make them inclusive to dads, then more dads would inevitably then turn up.
Yeah, I think it is incumbent on conference organisers to to maybe do a little bit more. But I guess it's a little bit of both for me. I do think that dads need to bite the bullet and show up a little bit more. But having said that, it is a big investment of both time and money to turn up for events where, as you said, you can be largely ignored at best and can end up being the butt of jokes at worst. And I do completely understand why many dads choose not to turn up, even though in doing so, you're not necessarily helping the cause. But to be fair, equally, I see the organisers' perspective too. At BML this year, pretty much all the brands were very much female-focused. But why would a male-focused brand turn up to an event when you're going to talk to maybe 5 or 6 dads? And for them, it makes no sense either. But having said that, I think Blog On, which both you and I have attended, is easily the best in terms of catering, not just for dads, but actually also for other niches, simply by making the focus about bloggers and not just about mums or parents. Why do you think that Blog On seems to skirt the gender divide in a way that the others don't seem to be able to?
I think you've hit the nail on the head with the fact that it is about blogging. You go to a lot of other conferences and it is about blogging, but a lot of the talks and the speakers and things are so much about a very, very specific niche, which is, working with brands or this, that, and the other. It's not really about the writing in itself and the blogging in itself. And I think with Blog On, they just have such a fantastic mix of sessions that can suit any niche. I mean, for me personally, I'm an absolutely shocking photographer, and yet I went to Lucy's session about props and things, and I absolutely loved it, and I came away feeling really, really pleased with some photos that I'd taken that had nothing to do with whether you were male or female at all. It was just how to set up nice photos. So I really think that by taking gender out of it and just making it about the photography, about the writing, about the filming, about the scheduling or the social media or whatever, it becomes a lot more welcoming to anyone, really.
So much of it is more about the general skills and techniques that are applicable to all manner of bloggers, and the brands there kind of reflect that as well. And it doesn't matter if you're male or female, or whether you're a parenting, food, travel, or beauty blogger. You're just part of a wider community there, and whatever the formula is that the law has found, it works. So let's talk about awards. Are dads discriminated against at awards? So at the Bibs at Brit Mums BML this year, there was one male winner out of 13 categories, which is 8%. There were only 5 male finalists out of 96, so below the nominal 8% average, but not massively so. So is there an issue here? To be honest, I'm not sure there is, although there is a danger always of the perception that a single male winner and a smattering of finalists could be seen as tokenism rather than the law of averages apply. Unless dad bloggers are significantly better than mum bloggers, and I don't believe that's the case at all. We're always going to be around that sort of 8% mark in terms of representation. And in fact, and this might be a controversial opinion, but I don't think there are actually as many good dad bloggers as there are mum bloggers, even if you take the differing proportions into account. Weight of numbers does count against dads, but there's also the fact that dads are more likely to be working full time and therefore have less time to devote to a blog. And I don't think it's a coincidence that a significant proportion of the best and most successful dad bloggers are also stay-at-home parents. Not all by any means, but certainly many. I think there's also one other simple psychological factor. Most readers of parenting blogs are mums, and mums are more likely to empathise with the writing of other mums than they are with dads. That makes them more likely to read mum blogs over dad blogs, and consequently, when it comes to voting for awards, I guess it's only natural that they're more likely to vote for other mums as well. So that's a dad's perspective, obviously. But I mean, Hannah, any thoughts on any of that from a mum's perspective?
I do agree with you. I think as far as the sort of tokenism thing is concerned, it's quite a frustrating point in a way, because if there is one dad blogger who wins an award, then fantastic. I don't see that as being tokenism because they have to have one dad blogger in there if that is representative of the blogging community as a whole. And if it's a blog that is deserving of that award, then, I don't think it matters. But there is going to be, in some respects, an attitude of, oh, well, look, they have to have a dad blogger in there, don't they? Which is, I think that's really frustrating. I do fully agree with your final point about the psychological factor. There can be all the gender arguments in the world, but a dad cannot breastfeed. And therefore, if a mum is struggling with breastfeeding, she is going to naturally want to read about other mums who have been through breastfeeding and what their experiences are and what worked for them. As a mum who's breastfed two babies with two completely different journeys, could not have been more different from one another, I didn't want a dad's perspective on what it was like to support his wife or partner with breastfeeding. I wanted to know how other mums got through it. And so there is that sense that if more of the readership is, as you say, it's sort of the stay-at-home parents or more part-time working parents, because I know I work full-time, I barely read any blogs, I just have not got the time for it. So if the bigger readership is mums, they naturally are going to gravitate more towards mum blogs. And I do agree. I think that then when it comes to voting in awards, they're naturally going to think of those mum blogs that got them through those difficult times. Who helped me realise I wasn't the only one who was struggling to get my baby to latch or whatever. And I think it is a numbers thing, really. It's just one of those little facts of life. But I want to see the really great blogs in the awards finals, whether they're mum bloggers, dad bloggers, or somewhere in between bloggers.
Yeah, no, exactly. And when I look at who was nominated for awards this year and who won them, I don't look at those and think, oh, she's only won because she's a mum, or he's only won because he's a dad. You want to see people up there on merit. And as you say, it doesn't matter whether it's a man or a woman who's writing it. If it's good writing, it's good writing. And are mums more likely to read mum blogs? Yes, of course they are. But that's neither fair nor unfair. That just is what it is. And I guess that theory about mums wanting to read other mums more than dads is backed up to some degree by stats. There have rarely been more than 2 or 3 dad bloggers in the top 100 of the top charts. Is it ever reasonable to expect that dads would be 50% of the top 100? No, I don't think that's realistic at all. But, maybe something like 10, 15% doesn't seem like an unreasonable goal to aim for. As the parenting book genre continues to grow, book sale figures also back up the preference for female authors over male ones. Sarah Turner's The Unmumsy Mum books and Matt Coyne's Dummy have both topped the Sunday Times bestseller list, but I know that Sarah's latest book outsells Matt's by a ratio of between 5 and 6 to 1, and that just reflects a natural preference and a natural association for mums to want to read the experience of other mums. So what's the solution? Should there be separate dads-only awards?
I don't think that there should be separate dads-only awards, because I think there's so much more to being a good blogger than whether you're a mum or a dad. And I think that if you're basically just plonking all of the dad bloggers into one category, then where is the opportunity for them to be winning best writer or any of these other categories that aren't actually specific to mums, even though mums do make up the vast majority of the shortlist? I think if you were to put all of the dads into one pool, it's just further segregating them rather than it being a wider parenting blog awards. I've just, like, as you said, I would like to see there being more good dad blogs going up the charts, and I think it will head that way. I think the more that articles from really good dad blogs are shared and are talked about, and hopefully maybe that will encourage other dads to start blogging, if they've got a real passion for writing. And I think it's getting out there is the way that it's going to help it grow, because I think just having a dads only award kind of means that someone's going to win purely because they're a dad, and it's not really as much on merit, and kind of outcasts you from being in any of the other categories.
Yeah, I mean that's my single biggest fear as well, that having a dad's award would mean that you'd be much, much less likely to have a dad winning an award in one of the other categories ever again. And I'm not really in favour of having a dad's award either. I do think there needs to be better male representation on judging panels and so on for parenting awards, but not really any more than that. So I'm kind of quite happy with the way things are, and it's really up to dads to to step forward and to show that through the quality of their writing that they can qualify for final shortlists and winning awards on merit. Now, having said all that, Voelio, who manage one of the world's largest databases of online influencers, recently published their list of the UK's top 10 parenting blogs, and 3 of them, including our very own Dave the Dad Venturer and John from Dadblog UK, made the list. 3 out of 10. That's pretty much unprecedented in the parent blogging world. And while Voelio don't publicise how they generate their rankings, it is largely based on influence metrics. Now, do they have an agenda to promote dads in what's primarily a mum's world of parent blogging? I think some people might argue that, but at the same time, their business's credibility depends on providing impartial stats and rankings. So, you can make up your own mind on that. But Hannah, any reaction to that top 10 list?
I thought it was really good to see some fantastic dad bloggers in there amongst some fantastic mum bloggers. I think there's a couple in there that I'm not so familiar with, mum and dad. Well, actually, no, I know all of the dad bloggers. There was 1 or 2 of the mums that I wasn't so familiar with. But overall, I think it does look like a really well-balanced list, and it feels like the people that are in there do hold their own within that list, the mums and the dads.
We can second guess lists like this forever, can't we, and not reach any definitive conclusion. And I mean, personally, I try not to get too worried about things that are largely outside of my control like that. And all I know is that if dads are generally underrepresented in the world of parent blogs, rankings, and awards, I'm not comfortable with just saying that it's discrimination against dads, and it's all someone else's fault. As women have been doing on many different fronts for centuries, I think dad bloggers owe it to themselves to focus on being at least as good, if not better, than their mum counterparts. Then let's have the argument about fair representation. But in the meantime, it was great to see the Voelio list, and it does feel like a positive step forward as far as I'm concerned. And that's it for this episode of the Meet the Parents podcast. We'll be back next week, but in the meantime, here's where you can find the 2 of us online.
I am at buddingsmiles.co.uk and on all social media platforms at buddingsmiles.
And I'm at Thatcham Dad, and you can find my blog at slouchingtowardsthatcham.com. So you can download this podcast on iTunes and Android devices, from our website at meettheparentspodcast.com, and via a variety of podcasting apps. You can also follow us on Twitter at Parents Podcast and Facebook at facebook.com/meettheparentspodcast. Thanks for listening, and do please join us again next week. Good night.